Welcome to the Q Podcast.
Q is about conversation.
If we're really concerned about ending poverty, we've got to be more concerned about creating justice.
Our cultural products as Christians need to both defy and resonate with the culture.
And God's doing amazing things. His church is expanding, His church is growing.
It's not what's the purpose of my life, it's what is the purpose that's been assigned.
Stay curious, think well, advance good. This is Q.
Germany did acknowledge what it did and did try as much as it possibly could to, can't repair the damage, you can't bring people back who died, but to try to do good within the context of how much good it was possible to do. And I give them credit for that. I give them great credit for that. It can't make it good again, but it can help. And even more important than the reparations were the acknowledging that it did wrong.
Welcome to the Q Podcast. This is Gabe Lyons, and the conversation you're going to hear today was one I had recently with Deborah Lipstadt. Deborah's the author of the best-selling book, Denying the Holocaust, and what I want you to hear in this conversation is a woman who decided to stand up for what's true, for what's right, even in the face of adversity, in the face of those around her saying that the Holocaust actually didn't happen. We know this is a historic fact, but she gets into why she took this case on, why she decided to defend the Holocaust, to make sure it's in historical records that this did indeed happen, that people were affected. And many of you might be rolling your eyes going, of course the Holocaust happened, we know that. But the point of Deborah's story, which now there's been a movie made about it called Denial, is that she's somebody who realized that actually there were some who were going to challenge this, who were going to say now that we're a few generations out from the Holocaust, that this didn't actually happen, and try to rewrite history or try to change what we know is historic, what we know is true, and try to make a new case for why it isn't true. But why it should be important to all of us is the same thing is true today. There are other ideas and parts of our history that are under attack. There are ways in which people want to rewrite what's taken place in our history. And we need people to be bold, convicted, to say, no, this is the truth, and we're going to stand for the truth. And I think in our culture today, there's going to be more and more of a need for more of us to be willing to do that. And so that's going to be an opportunity today, is for you to hear somebody who really had to face that down, who's dealt with this at the highest levels, and who I think her story is going to encourage you today. So join with me as we listen in on this conversation.
Deborah, thank you for being with us today.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
So, Deborah, I mean, for a lot of people, they maybe haven't read your books and don't know the backstory, but will you just kind of catch us up a little bit on what even brought you into this space where you found yourself writing a book about the Holocaust?
Well, I'm not a child of survivors. I have no direct relatives that I lost in the Holocaust, but it was always something that I knew about. I can't tell you exactly when I first learned about it, but I knew about it. As an undergraduate, I spent some time studying in Israel, in Jerusalem, at the Hebrew University. And that was in the late 60s, when survivors were all around. I remember the man of the little shop where I bought my laundry, when he reached out the first time just to take my pile of laundry, he had a number on his arm. And I became very aware of it then, grew more interested in it. There weren't courses being taught on it when I was an undergraduate. But as I began my graduate work, I drifted more and more towards this area to try to understand how was such a thing possible.
Yeah, and as you went on that journey, I mean, you wrote a book about it, you started to uncover more of the facts, and then you realized that there were some people who didn't agree with your take on history.
Well, when I first heard about them, to be very honest, and I'm a little embarrassed to admit this now, when I first heard about Holocaust deniers, I laughed. I thought, these are folks who are the equivalent of flat earth theorists. Who would take them seriously? And a couple of other historians said, no, you think you should take them seriously. Many said, don't, just ignore this. And the thing that intrigued me more as I began to delve into it was not the deniers themselves, because the deniers themselves are typical of conspiracy theory haters. People who look out in the world and see a conspiracy against them, anti-Semites. I mean, the people who believe that Jews control the world and control foreign policy and the banks and whatever else they control. People who believe on 9/11, 3,000 Jews the night before got called and told not to come to work, which is an absurd claim because it means that there's some central authority that knows where every Jew in New York works and that 3,000 people were called and didn't tell anybody. And I mean, it's just absurd. Mm-hmm. So I realized that I couldn't change deniers, and that was not my objective. But I wanted to address people who might be confused by this, who might be convinced, who might hear them saying this and say, well, maybe there's something to it. So I wanted to get to the people who didn't know, about the Holocaust, who might hear these people, and because they present themselves with a voice of authority, they make it sound like they are people who really know something. I wanted to reach the public.
Yeah, and I think you've done an incredible job with that in a book that really did lay out the case, and you really took on some of the central ideas. But there was even more beyond that. I mean, I can tell just from what I've read about you and what I understand from the story that you cared a lot about not giving platform to those who would deny such a thing, because the history you knew was true. And I would say it kind of relates to our culture today a lot, where we see a lot of people have a lot of opinions. Obviously, social media today has made that an easy way for people to have platform, to have a stage, to say what they think or to vent their opinion. And it might not be based on anything even close to what is truth or what history would say, but they still have a platform. And for you, I mean, this was back in the 90s when you were in the midst of this, but when a denier came forward and challenged you, you said, I'm going to not just tell you you're wrong or debate you, we're going to do something more serious. Will you just describe what ended up happening?
Well, I don't debate Holocaust deniers. That's like asking an earth scientist to debate someone who says the earth is flat. That's like asking someone who's a child psychologist to debate someone who believes children should be beaten within an inch of their lives to be taught discipline. We know that's just crazy. Or to ask someone, I'm talking to you now from Wall Street, I'm looking out at the place where the World Trade Center, asking, the mayor of New York to debate someone who thinks 9/11 was an inside job or something. So I don't want to debate these people. I don't want to give them credibility of being an other side. I think it's very important, and I think many of your listeners are sensitive to this. And you talked about this in your opening remarks about relativism in your opening question to me. There's a difference between facts, opinions, and lies. And what Holocaust deniers do is lie. They take the documents, they twist what they say, they change dates, they change facts, and then they present it and they say, I have a document. So I don't want to give them the credibility and the respect of spending time debating them. And that's why I refuse to enter into a debate with them. What I don't refuse to do is when my students come in and say, I heard this, that, or the other, I show them how the lie is constructed. I show them the facts. I show them the details. But to debate these people, I don't think it's worth my time, and I don't think it's smart to elevate them to another side, because they're not. They're liars.
Yeah, and the particular person in this case was David Irving, who I know really came after you and was one of the chief deniers and tried to prove his case. And part of what comes out in this story is seeing how you were willing to even take this into a legal process to say, hey, it's not okay for you to just be out there telling people things that are false, but parroting them as if they're true. And so tell us more about that.
In my book that I wrote about denial, Holocaust denial, in which I wanted to reach, as I said earlier, the public who might be influenced by denial, I made brief reference to David Irving, because David Irving was a well-known historical writer. And I just knew that he would have influence on people because he had written so much on World War II. And he became a denier at a point when people were paying less attention to him. Even before he became a denier, he was a great fan of Adolf Hitler. He talked about writing the autobiography that Hitler never got to write. He loved Adolf Hitler. He had great adulation for Nazi Germany. And then he moved over to being a denier for whatever reason, whether it was to get more attention or whatever. But he knew the document, so he knew he was lying. And when he became a denier, I knew that he might have influence on people because people knew he had a reputation as a writer of historical works. So in this book that I wrote on Holocaust denial, I devoted a couple of paragraphs to just saying he's a liar and he's a falsifier of history, and he knows he's doing that. He then waited till the book came out in the United Kingdom, and he sued me for libel. I think it's very important for your listeners to recognize that I didn't go after him, with a legal mallet. He sued me. But what I did, and I think this is what you were referring to in your question, when he sued me, I think he thought that as an American, as a woman, someone far away, I wouldn't know what to do, and I would just sign a paper and say, I was wrong, you were right, I libeled you. But instead, I chose to fight. I chose to fight him hard. There's a saying in Jewish tradition, when someone comes out to kill you, get up earlier and fight back stronger. So I felt he was coming to kill my reputation, to kill my credibility. I assembled a wonderful team of lawyers. I got a lot of support from people, and we really went after his credibility. We didn't call him names. We didn't expect the judge to know, things. We followed his footnotes back to the sources and showed that he was a liar and a falsifier of history.
One of the things we talk about at Q, that the role of a person of faith and a Christian would be in culture is to, when you see something wrong in the world, you should stop and confront it. And I feel like
that's right.
In this way, you were experiencing something wrong. You knew if he had his day in court, or if you just settled or just kind of went along, you were really going to be giving up on so much of the work that you had done, and possibly even creating more audience for what he was doing. And it's just this deep commitment and devotion to truth. And that's what I just love about you, and then getting to know you better, is just that was going to be the thing that would win the day. You wanted the truth to come out, and you probably, couldn't have anticipated it being as big as it ended up becoming in terms of how many more people would hear about this, how much more it would prove the Holocaust. Which is just sad to even have to say that. But I think in today's world, you recognize, Deborah, like a new generation, many times they're getting history from 10 different sources, and they're watching a YouTube video for 5 minutes to try to understand a significant historical event. And if they see that, they start to say, well, hey, maybe that's true. And it creates just so much doubt. But here you said, no, we're gonna go after some things. For those who haven't learned a lot about the Holocaust or don't understand why people would deny it, what were some of the things that a denier would say? I mean, what were the ways in which they would say that the Holocaust didn't happen?
A denier would say there was no plan to murder the Jews, that some Jews may have died. Notice the word died as opposed to murder or killed. But they died from disease and from war-related privations. A denier might say Adolf Hitler never planned to kill the Jews, and there were some people around him who did it, but this wasn't state-sponsored genocide. This was revolutionary acts on the part of people. A denier might say there were no gas chambers. Gas chambers were an impossibility. A denier might say that the Jews who were murdered on the Eastern Front, shot on the Eastern Front, were really partisans and revolutionaries and therefore had to be shot. And finally, a denier might say, because you would ask if someone was, again, that tabula rasa person, that person who was naive and didn't really understand who they were confronting or who they were being exposed to if they encountered a denier, the person might say, but why would anybody make up this story? And a denier would say, the Jews have made this up in order to get money from Germany and get a state of Israel, that it's all made up, it's all a myth, and they did this for that purpose. So it plays on the evilness that these deniers, who many of whom are neo-Nazis in the extreme, and sometimes I wonder about using the word neo, to play on that connection and to bring it into contemporary anti-Semitism, saying, oh, this is all those evil Jews trying to win support for Israel. And that would be sort of the crux of what they would say.
And would you say that was the motivation in the court case that you ended up being a part of, that there was anti-Semitism was the root at which Irving was trying to deny this, or was there some other motivation?
No, well, there may be other motivations, but it's always anti-Semitism. I mean, to make this claim, to claim that Jews made this up and had the ability to perpetrate this hoax, as they would call it, over all the world, presupposes a power on the part of the Jews, a power to recreate, to rewrite history that is rooted in anti-Semitism. This whole notion that if Jews were so powerful, I sometimes like to say, how come 1 out of every 3 of them died in the lifetime of people, maybe some of whom are listening to this recording, listening to this interview? So it's rooted in anti-Semitism. It's rooted not just in a notion of anti-Semitism that Jews did this, but it's rooted in a notion of inculcating anti-Semitism. For those people who may not be, very anti-Semitic, and I'm always careful about saying very, a little, because anti-Semitism, I think, it's like pregnancy. You either are or you aren't, but is to make them more anti-Semitic, to make them more resent the Jews. So that's the motivating factor. Now, there may be other things that come into it, a love of Hitler, a love of Nazi Germany, a feeling of Nazi Germany was an authoritarian regime, and that's the kind of regime we should have. But it's always got to have anti-Semitism as the cornerstone.
Well, the film Denial really does such a good job of capturing the drama of what you were going through and how you were going to have to deliberate and work through this particular argument and to make the facts become more clear and really lead the Lord overseeing this case through the facts of how Irving was coming against you. And it's just fascinating to watch. It's very dramatic. It's very interesting. But for us to just kind of fast forward now, I mean, it's been 16 years since that trial completed. Mm-hmm. But what is the movement of Holocaust deniers today? Is that still a growing trend? Did you find that slowed down? What is because I mean, in 2000, when this would have ended, people weren't really on social media. There wasn't as much ability to share information as there is today. So give me a little update on kind of where that conversation is.
I think that what I call hardcore Holocaust denial, and usually we use the terms hardcore and softcore in another category, but I do that on purpose because I think that Holocaust denial is historical pornography, and I don't use the term lightly. Hardcore denial has been diminished in many parts of the world, not everywhere. The Iranians still are, they'll say, oh, our government doesn't deny, but they sponsor contests which deny, cartoon contests on Holocaust denial. They give speeches saying, oh, we aren't deniers, but we don't know what really happened. So you see it a lot there. You see it in some far, far right extremist neo-Nazi kind of groups. You see it in parts of Europe. And even in parts of the United States. Much more prevalent is what I call softcore denial. The people who will say to you, oh, I've heard enough about the Holocaust. I'm tired of hearing about the Holocaust. Can't you stop talking about it? It's as if to say, people who have been discriminated against and lost 1 out of every 3 of their people, they should stop focusing on it, especially when it has a lesson to teach the world. I mean, to stop focusing on it would be a tragedy of major proportions. I'm not saying only talk about it or make it the reason for your belief and your faith and your observance of tradition, but it diminishes, to say, oh, stop talking. It would be like saying to a person whose family was raised in slavery, stop talking about slavery. Slavery shaped their family, shaped much of this country, and it's important that we are aware of that and we acknowledge it and recognize it as part of our history. Even though no one from my family was here, it's part of the history of the country I love and which given me so much and to which I'm so devoted. So I think that, what we're seeing much more now is softcore. Or I'll give you another example. When people talk about the Nazi-like policies of Israel, you can disagree with some of Israel's policies. You can think they're mistaken, they're misguided. I don't know any country in which there's not debate in the country and sometimes outside the country. But to talk about Nazi-like policies, or to say, because Israel did something wrong, it doesn't have a right to exist. I never heard someone say, because Germany, was responsible for the murder of millions, Jews and many, many others, it doesn't have a right to exist. Or I never heard people say, China, which was responsible for the murder of millions, the Chinese authorities doesn't have a right to exist. You might say it has to change. It has to change its policies. But with Israel, you get that. And that often is linked to, people talking about Nazi-like policies and things like that. So I think we see much more soft core denial. And we've seen it with the rise of anti-Semitism in so many parts of the world, including the United States.
Deborah, speaking to just modern day relationship between Jews and Israel and other nations, I know one of the really interesting things was how Germany worked to create reparations. Mm-hmm. And that's very historically significant because we don't see that taking place a lot in other areas of the world, and specifically in America. There's conversations about whether there should be reparations with African Americans. And mm-hmm. What role did reparations play in healing and in acknowledging the past and
that's a great
also
question.
Moving forward?
That's a great question. Certainly reparations played an important role. The German word for reparations, well, it's sort of similar to the English word wiedergutmachen, to make good again. If I had lost my entire family, I've gone to weddings, bar mitzvahs, celebrations of people, and I look around and I notice that there are no aunts or uncles, there are no first cousins, there are lots of friends, and there may be siblings, but there are no cousins because the entire, both parents may have been survivors and all their siblings were killed off. So no reparation can make it good again. I was just met this morning not a young man, but a man who was one of the youngest survivors of Auschwitz. He's a very prominent photographer. He had just seen denial, and he came up to me with tears in his eyes, and he put out his hand and he said, "Thank you." To be thanked by a survivor of the Holocaust, you can hear it in my voice, is overwhelming. I motioned, don't thank me, that he should thank me. It's backwards, But it's the reparations can heal his loss, can heal his pain. But it was an effort, and I just was in Germany a few weeks ago. I go there often, particularly on, for research and Holocaust education-related visits. Germany did acknowledge what it did and did try as much as it possibly could to, can't repair the damage, you can't bring people back who died, but to try to do good within the context of how much good it was possible to do. And I give them credit for that. I give them great credit for that. It can't make it good again, but it can help. And even more important than the reparations were the acknowledging that it did wrong. I mean, I often find it, I don't want to say funny because it's too serious to be funny, but ironic that Germans don't deny the Holocaust. There never has been, not only post-war Germans, but Germans who've been put on trial, including Adolf Eichmann, who was on trial in Jerusalem for his life and desperately wanted to survive. He never stood up and said it didn't happen. He never stood up and said it's all a myth. He said, I wasn't responsible. I didn't kill anyone. I'm not responsible. There's never been a German who's been on trial who stood up and said it's a myth. And yet these deniers do, because they are so motivated by their hatred of Jews and sometimes other things as well.
We think about modern day culture and how much ideas now are just spreading. And like I said earlier, anybody can have an idea and platform that. As you look at the landscape right now and kind of the context that we're in, are you concerned about just sort of the proliferation of bad ideas and ideas that are given more merit than they should have been because there's just a lack of sort of objective thinking and the inability to offend anybody, or it seems too politically correct to confront somebody because we just think, hey, your idea is fine for you, but it really does have consequences. What are you thinking about as you look at the next few years and where things are going?
Right. It's easy, to beat up on the internet. Neither you and neither I know I couldn't, and I bet you couldn't either, do our jobs without the internet. My research is enhanced by the internet. But the internet is like a knife. A knife in the hands of a murderer can be a weapon. A knife in the hands of a surgeon can be a life-saving device. The internet has allowed proliferation of hatred, proliferation of conspiracy theories, has allowed people, who might have been trolling off in their corner to find one another and sort of feel like they're a large group. And it's very disturbing. And I am disturbed by the relativism. I'm not an opponent of political correctness in and of itself. I like it that people will not use the N-word. I like it that people will not say, use the K word for Jews or other words. I like it that people know that certain things aren't acceptable, but like any good idea can be taken too far, and then you get a shutting down of free speech. I think we have to find a sort of middle road in terms of that, of allowing for different ideas, but for those of us who know those ideas are false, to be willing to do the hard work, not calling names, but the hard work of exposing lies and exposing falsehoods. That's what we did in my trial. That's the story that denial tells. And be willing to stand up when someone tells a lie, engages in prejudice, engages in discrimination, that we're willing to stand up and say, that's wrong, and I'm going to show you why it's wrong. Rachel Weisz, who plays me in the film, recently said, and I was very touched by this, that I was willing to be unpopular. I don't know if that was conscious or not, but sometimes we have to be willing to be unpopular.
Yeah. Well, you certainly stood for your convictions, and you didn't know what the outcome would be, but you did it not just for yourself, but for other people. It's like you put yourself in a place where you were going to advocate for others and for a story that you really had nothing to gain except making sure the truth went forward.
I did want to protect my reputation, but I have to say, and I say it at the end of the book, of my book, on which the film Denial is based, that though I was very frightened during the trial and kept thinking, why is this happening to me? I wish it was happening to someone else. Now that I look back after all these years, and it's both then and even more so now, and now with this release of Denial and the positive intention it's getting and the praise it's getting, I feel very lucky. I was given the chance. In Jewish tradition, we have, acts of loving kindness, taking care of the sick, welcoming the stranger, looking after the orphan, as many, many religious traditions do. And each act is identified by its name. It's called, taking care of the sick or welcoming the stranger. The only act that is called genuine goodness, genuine righteousness, that's its name, chesed shel emet, is when you take care of the dead, because the dead can't pay you back for what you did for them. And if I take care of the sick, I don't do it so someone should pay me back. But if I'm sick, that's what it means to live in a community. One helps the other. But when you take care of the dead, there's nothing they can do for you. And I had the privilege, I'm a believing person, the God-given privilege to take care of the dead and try to protect what happened to them and the living as well. And I am very grateful for that.
Well, thank you, Deborah, for spending your time just sharing with us more about your story. I'm glad our listeners got to know you a little bit better today, and that they'll dig into some of your books and your work and appreciate this film, Denial, that tells the story so well. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Deborah. She's a fascinating person, and it was fun to get to have this conversation with her and learn more about her. And I hope you'll go see the movie Denial. I think it's one of those films that'll make you think, that'll create great conversation, and really will pose the question for you, like, what are the ideas today that are going to try to be refuted tomorrow? What are the historic facts that people might question, and what does it mean to stand up to that? What does it mean to tell the truth, to defend the truth, even when it costs you something, and even when you're risking maybe your own safety, security, and your very own well-being to pursue those kinds of things? That really is what it means to be just, to stand up for what's right, to have conviction and boldness and courage. And so I just hope as you go throughout your week, this week, that this will be just one more inspiring story about how we can all do that, how we can be better at that. Thank you for joining us again for this Q podcast, and we'll look forward to talking with you next time.